Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me? My name is Jocelyn Streed, and I graduated as a pre-med English major here at Duke in 2013. I have the privilege and the pleasure of introducing our final speaker, Dr. Rita Charon. I first learned about Dr. Charon as a first year here at Duke, and her work has guided the way I and countless others have viewed medicine ever since. Dr. Rita Charon received her MD from Harvard, but after realizing the importance of stories in the practice of medicine, she later obtained a PhD in English at Columbia. She is in practice as a general internist and teaches at Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons. She is internationally known for inaugurating the field of narrative medicine, which fortifies clinical practice with the narrative competence to recognize, absorb, interpret, and be moved by stories of illness. At Columbia, she is the founder and director of the program in narrative medicine. It is no exaggeration to say that Dr. Charon's work in leadership is pushing us all towards a better and more complete vision of medical practice and training. And if that weren't enough, she is also known for her scholarship on Henry James. I could go on and on about Dr. Charon's many accomplishments, but perhaps it's time for us to hear from her herself.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And the work of Jocelyn, I hope you get to talk with her after we propound, because it's just an exemplar of the kind of work that can happen when science, art, and thought converge. So our first speaker talked about evidence and accuracy and how one might use one instead of the other or combine them. And I'm going to add to that dyad a third term, and that's ambiguity. I think it belongs there with the other two. I also see as the third person on this afternoon that I'm kind of the concrete one, I think. So I sit in a clinic office in Upper Manhattan, Washington Heights, where I've been in practice since 1981, which means that a lot of people in Washington Heights have had me as a doctor for 32, 33 years. And we've grown old together, and we've come to understand a lot of things about one another that take time to understand. I'm sorry about this business, for those of you there. So I've developed some means of shortening the time it might take to learn what I consider to be critical about the persons I care for. And perhaps it's because I've gotten a little more confident in the presence of that third term, ambiguity, along with the evidence and accuracy. So that I can now, when I meet with a new patient, instead of going into the rigmarole of when were you in the hospital, what operations have you had, what medicines do you take, what allergies do you have, do you get short of breath, do you have chest pain, do you have GERD, do you have... Instead of doing that, I've learned to sit in my rolling chair away from the computer, to not write, to not type, and simply to say these two sentences. I will be your doctor, and so I need to know a great deal about your body and your health and your life. Please tell me what you think I should know about your situation. And then I've learned to not say anything more. And except for the occasional patient who says things like, "You mean you want me to talk?" Others have taken my invitation and framed the situation for which they've come in the way that they desire. So some persons may start by telling me about deaths in the family or miscarriages or plans to become a feature filmmaker. And others start with my right knee hurts, and the orthopod says I need pre-op clearance. But what I learn, if I manage to not say anything, keep my hands in my lap, and absorb what I hear, is I get a otherwise unavailable framing for that which the person has come to a doctor for. And that frame may or may not have anything to do with physical health or mental health, or how am I going to get my, I don't know, insurance to cover my hip replacement. Instead, I hear these luminous, singular accounts of what it is that the person really has in mind. By now, a few weeks ago, the new patient was a very old, like in his 90s, very demented man who was incontinent. That means he could not control his urine. He couldn't speak. He couldn't swallow. He phonated a little bit. He made noises with his voice, but it was not meaningful. Well, it was not words. And he was with his home attendant and not someone in his family. So there was very little I could learn about the gentleman. About a week after I first met him, I got a call from a very panicked intern at a local hospital that he had been admitted to the hospital. And the intern was very, very panicked because the family member had revoked the choice to not use aggressive means of treatment. Do you understand? That the patient had been deemed do not resuscitate. And on this hospitalization, the family changed their mind and said, do everything you can for our father. The intern was very panicked. He says, what can I do? Can you send me the form that they signed last year? I said, it wouldn't matter. They've changed their mind. So the patient was treated for a rather easily treatable condition and came home. When I saw him next in the office, now with a member of the family, I was mindful enough to simply ask the family member, tell me stories about your father. And that's, I think, about the only thing I had to say. And there, in answer to that, I was able to learn what I needed to know about their growing up in the Dominican Republic, about the farm that they all worked on, about the special bond that this son had with his father. I think the one time I broke my silence was to ask, do you have such a bond with your sons? And he said, I have it with every one. At the very end of this conversation, the son looked at me and said, we know our father is at the end of his life. We just want to make it as easy for him as we can. So nothing was said about advance directives, proxies, law, DNR. It was part of the account given by this son about what he hoped for his father. So that's what I consider to be the storytelling within medicine or healthcare. I want to work with you a little bit about other forms of telling. Now, you're going to put the lights down, and we're going to put some pictures up. No, there it is. Okay, lights down as far as you can, so you can see this Rothko. This is number 16. by Rothko. He painted it in 1960. It lives in room 922 of the Met in New York. You know that Rothko came to the U.S. He was a Russian Jew, came to the U.S. as a young man, gifted artist, got into Yale, became part of the kind of trendy, the avant-garde, first figural then abstract art world. He did not do well. He was not accepted in the Ivy halls. He struggled profoundly in order to do his art. He did not live to see the acceptance and the awareness of the gift that he had. He took his life in 1970, about 10 years after he did this painting. So when I go to the Met and sit on the floor in room 922 in front of this painting, I sit long enough there and I want you to, that's why the room is dark. If you look at the red rectangle at the top for long enough, you'll see it enter into, kind of blur into the blue, that the blue invaginates itself into the red. It shifts around. You have to be patient and just give yourself over to the painting. The painting does not give up its secrets very easily. It's a jealous painting. If you look at the brown rectangle at the bottom, it shifts from being just brown to being a kind of fertile, earthy soil at the bottom of the painting. And it kind of looks like it's moving if you sit there long enough. The museum guards come up to me, "Lady, are you all right?" You know, because I'm just sitting there on the floor on the against the opposing wall. But they don't kick me out. Let me have a little light so I can see where I'm going. So Rothko writes in his manifesto, it's called The Artist Reality, Philosophies of Art. He writes about first the poets and philosophers. He's trying to place the work he does as a visual artist within the universe of theorists and other scholars. So he's talking about poets and philosophers. He says, quote, "Their chief preoccupation, like the artist, is the expression in concrete form of their notions of reality. Like them, the artist deals with the verities of time and space, life and death, the heights of exaltation, and the depths of despair." So poets, philosophers, and artists do this. This is, of course, what we find ourselves doing in all aspects of healthcare, dealing with the verities of life and death, exaltation and despair, and that the equipment at our disposal to do it is to express in concrete form our notions of reality. So here with this painting, we are being summoned into the expression of the artist. This is an abstract painting. It doesn't have a figural or representational or referential message or meaning. But in the face of it, if we give it enough time, we're summoned out of our ordinary selves by the gift of this artist. We can be summoned in like manner by paintings, by a partita, by a tango, by a novel, especially one by Henry James, that we're summoned, we're called by whatever it is we mean by the word beauty. And it's been my experience sitting in that little clinic office on 168th Street that kind of summoning takes place like time and time over when I'm in the presence of a patient as he or she gives an account of self. And I realized this some months ago, no, more than months, years ago. I was in a recital at the Jazz at Lincoln Center, which is this fantastic performance space because it overhangs Central Park. So when it's dark, which it often is, in the jazz space, you can see all of Central Park and all the headlights and the taillights and all of that like jewel light, kind of like the phosphorescence in the ocean. And Brad Meldau was playing a solo recital, and I found myself in the middle of it feeling as if literally I had been carried to the ceiling. I was so summoned by the music that I felt like I was floating on the ceiling with all the other people in the recital hall. Do you see? That feeling of being carried away is physically what I can experience in the presence of a singular person who's entrusted me enough to come and give an account of self. You can bring the lights down a little bit. So this is another Rothko. I haven't visited this one. I don't even know where it is. Now, we're not painters. I mean, some are, I guess, in this room, but we're not necessarily all painters. But we're certainly all tellers and listeners of stories. So I think, and that's what we're talking about today. So with the background of the Rothkos, and there'll be more, I want to talk about what it is that the narratives, the accounts can do. And it's, again, my experience and observation that stories open wide the doors between the teller and the listener. Can you put the lights up a little bit? Stories open wide the door, or the doors, between the teller and the listener. I had the great opportunity of seeing Frank Langella play Lear. Yes? Frank Langella, the masterful actor, play Lear. And there's Langella lying on the stage with the body of Cornelia, with the mirror, right? Trying to see if she had breath or if she did not have breath. And wherever this came from in Shakespeare's gift, he distilled, or he or they, distilled for us that which was up until then inexpressible. So it's the gravity, the solemnity, the fullness of stories that make for their power. It is the otherness of stories. It has to be one and only one. One and only one. The singularity, that's why we write and that's why we read. That's what narrative is for, to make of the singular the subject. And that these grave, solemn, full stories summon us toward them with their own integrity. It is not as if, it is that the story calls me as a witness. And so in the office, what occurs, if this is well going, and it isn't always well going, what occurs is that I can recognize the one telling me. I can recognize that son telling me stories about his father. And in the magical reciprocity of clinical work, I am recognized as one who can recognize. See? So that all of us in the room, and that day it was the son, the home attendant, the interpreter, or me, all of us are achieving another level not only of reaching of the other, but also of self, not just self-recognition, but self-making, self-making. Now, stories are complicated things. I need a little bit more light, because you're all going to fall asleep. Yeah. Stories are complicated. I never use the word stories in the work I do anymore, because too many people think, oh, stories. Oh, go get the patient's story, like it's an easy thing to do. And so I don't use the word story, really. I stick to account, narrative, things like that. Because stories, I'll use it here, but I've put a footnote on it. They're demanding, risky things. To read a story, to engage with one, requires that you face doubt. This is why ambiguity needs to be there. You face doubt. There is no answer to the story. To know what to do with a story requires skill. I teach close reading in the graduate school at Columbia, the every word counts kind of close reading. My midterm paper for my students is to choose an inch of To the Lighthouse and write 10 pages on it. All right? Every word counts. Edward Said writes an essay on Glenn Gould playing Bach. He says it's the kind of playing where every note counts, right? It's teachable, this kind of entering a story, but it's hard. Again, stories do not relinquish their treasures very easily. They guard their treasures, I think, like we do. Alice Munro, the now Nobelist, Canadian fiction writer, she says, when I read a story, I don't follow it like it's a road. I enter it like it's a house. And she says, she enters this house, she finds out what different rooms are there, she smells it, she feels the climate of it, she comes to understand the rules of engagement within that house. It's a different experience every time she reads it. It's a different house. It's a different day. So this kind of skill, very close reading, is not just to be hoarded for literature majors, because dutifully it feels it has to be shared with all, because knowing what to do with stories changes your life. So you will be happy to know that doctors, nurses, dentists, social workers, psychoanalysts, emergency room doctors, radiology residents, all of them at Columbia are being taught close reading. All right? This slowly is leading to institutional change at Columbia. Stories function as a clearing. I didn't bring a picture of a clearing, but you know what clearings are. They might be in the redwood awe and wonder. They might be ordinary oak trees, but where the trees kind of thin out and there's a safe place where persons can gather. I think that stories function as clearings, or bowers is another image for it, where we all can gather within the protection of the story and have means of making contact with one another that would not be possible without the bower of the story. I think this is what temples are for, and cemeteries, and other kinds of memorials, and I certainly know that this is why we read in groups. Now, do I only go to 4:30? Is that right?
You guys had talked about that, but you could go as
Okay, no. So here's what we're going to do. I want to read something with you. All right? Can you pass out what I have to read?
People over there get handouts.
This next Rothko is a dark Rothko, which shows these black windows and a purple mist outside the windows. And I just show it to you to remind you that the kinds of accounts that we're going to hear in now a health setting, the kind of accounts we hear are ominous oftentimes. The stories of illness lead to dark places, of course. We are human, we are mortal, we have bodies, we will die. And so this purple mist that we see outside the windows, that's what's summoning us oftentimes with the stories of illness. And it takes a certain kind of courage to let oneself be summoned by them. I think this is often missing in those of us who care for the sick. This Rothko is in the Tate Modern in London, and you can sit on the bench opposite this one for hours and nobody will bother you at all. Okay, it's the last day I can teach this poem for an entire year. I'm going to read it for you. October light. That same light by which I saw her last made me close my eyes, now in reverie, remembering how she sat in the garden, with a red shawl over her shoulders and a small book in her lap, once in a while looking up with the day's brightness on her face, as to appraise something of utmost seriousness she had just read at least twice. With the sky clear and open to view, because the leaves had already fallen and lay still around her 2 feet. This is Charles Simic. And you notice that that last sentence is not even really a sentence? You notice that? We don't have a lot of time, but just what strikes you about this poem? Can I have that double mic so I can wander around?
You want me to? Or?
No, I got it. What do you know? You each have a copy. What do you see in this poem? What word or phrase strikes you? You think she's dead? Do you all see her as dead? Huh? No? What if not dead? What if not dead?
Vibrant and interchangeable with the light.
Okay, so the light is doing different things in different minds. For some, it's a setting of the light. Am I right? What makes for the notion that she's dead?
Well, because it's very beautiful, and he's obviously he's remembering this lovely moment of someone he loved.
Okay, so it's
Like grief.
Feels like grief.
it feels like grief. Can you say why?
The same light by which I saw her last. There's a melancholy to that memory.
So there are elements of remembrance, memorial, obituary, recollecting, and yet reverie. What's reverie? What's reverie?
I think it's full of imagining. I also think it's very interesting that she's doing this close reading of the book, and then she's thinking about it, and then the writer is doing a close reading of her, and then we're doing a close reading of both of them. So
Did you hear that? Did you hear that? That what we have here is a nested set of images, that the woman, the she, is doing a close reading of a book, having to read at least twice, where the speaker, not necessarily Charles Simic, but a speaker, is remembering her doing that and doing a close reading of her, while we sitting in this room are doing a close reading of it. So that these nested processes of this deep, deep attention, we talked about how many plots can fit this data. What happens in this poem? What's the now of the poem? The memory. Yeah. I close my eyes now in reverie. So what happens is not the brightness, not the autumn leaves have fallen, but the being summoned by the light. Simic, or his speaker, is summoned by the light. So when I bring this poem on Tuesday to the radiology residents, I'm going to give them a writing prompt, and I'm going to give it to you, and I'm going to give you through 2.5 minutes to write. Are you ready? Are you all old enough to have a pen with you? You can write right on my poem. Does everyone have something to write with? Good. Here's the prompt. And I'm not going to let you finish, but I'll let you start. Write about a person you see in the light of reverie. Write about a person you see in the light of reverie. Go ahead. Okay, I'm gonna stop you almost as soon as you got started. Were this to be next Tuesday's session in the radiology auditorium, I'd have the residents pair up and read to one another what they wrote, under the conviction that all writers require readers. We can't do this here, but I'm just curious to hear a couple of you tell me, where did you go? Where did this bring you?
So I wrote about. Hi. Okay. I wrote about the way that the light hit I wrote about the way that the light hit the glass panes of my front door in the afternoon when I would come home from school. So get dropped off by the bus, the light would hit the glass panes on the front door, and they would sort of glitter across the floor as I opened it. And in that same sort of motion of the glittering of the light in the afternoon on the floor, I would smell whatever my grandma was cooking. Yeah, sure. It's basically what I just said. But there's a way the afternoon light lit the glass panes of my front door that made patterns on the marble floor as I opened it. A tiny fragmented sweep open that cut one part of the day, school, from another home. And that sweep of the door, that glittering of the sunlight, whatever my grandma was cooking for lunch, is when you called time. But the image I was getting to, if I had another 30 seconds, was of her dancing while she was cooking, because that's always what she would be doing. She would be playing mariachi music or some, ballads from the 1950s and cooking.
So that's like 2 minutes, maybe 75 words, and I mean, this is a well-wrought text. This is a very complex text that you've created that's got the environmental, metaphorical business of the poem moving within a somewhat remote time for you. This is 10, 15 years ago. 20, 25 years ago. And do you see how, like me with Brad Meldaw, that she was summoned by the beauty of this poem toward something? Nor did she say, gee, I think I'm going to use the glittering of the light as a proxy for the... Right? Thank you. Where else? Where did you go? Where did this bring you? Let me see. We've heard from you. Who else are we going to hear from? Anyone? Okay. But you have to read what you wrote.
I didn't.
Oh, you didn't?
But I listened. This, to me, I'm Saul Boyarsky, Duke, 54 house staff. So I happen to be 91, and the part of Duke that I dwell in now is a retirement community. Community, not a home. It's more than a home, because it's an expanded home. This to me is an epiphany, eureka, wow. Because 2 days ago I was trying to tell someone about the Rothko chapel in Dallas. I couldn't think of it. Couldn't think of the word. Wasn't wrote in. It began with an R. And now you gave me the word.
I'm glad. I'm glad you were here.
And that's one. What you talk about, how you deal with your radiology residents, and boy, radiologists need it, as you know, because they're shadow readers, and they're therapeutic also, and nuclear. Now, I'm going to have a senile moment if I don't keep talking.
Oh,
But I,
to end.
yeah, how much time?
None.
None? No. This, I'm here because Nikki Vongsness, who's very quiet up there, her nickname is Mazda. She'll tell you why, but I think the Zoroastrians' name for God was Mazda. Can't be clear for sure. And we go from night to day and night to day, from darkness to light. In reverie, we revere God, life, light, and so on.
Thank you.
I'm over time.
Thank you. Thank you. Does anyone else want to tell us where you went? No. Yes. Go ahead. Go ahead. Here.
I didn't actually, I thought of a memory, and that memory is lit up, but I didn't go specifically to. Oh, just read. Okay, but I go to a photograph, so a photograph is light. I see little Bobby with her kerchief, blue, I think, in her apartment with Roberta, giving me those little tea biscuit cookies I loved so much and only she had. I see her then, not as I see her now, primarily in her wedding photo, young, a real looker, with a round face such as my own. No, I see her in her engagement photo, with the narrow shoulders, so small, draped in a satin-fitted dress, almost oriental, like the fashion of the times.
Thank you. So do you see how not only the visual and the audible, but the olfactory is mobilized here? The level of sensory detail in that reverie is astonishing. And I think you had some photos to show, or you had them available in your own. So this is just a way to bring to you some evidence that the representations, what we just did is represented in language a memory, a sensation, an event, a state of affairs, a person who was in our, what did we call it, Anne Carson, mush of the unconscious? We just pulled forth from the mush, from that which is known but not in awareness right now, through the act of representation. And it can be language, it can be visual, it can be dance, it can be partitas. But in the representation is not just the recording or the reporting of that which we know, but the discovering of it. We know that. Nelson Goodman says when you represent your construal, your memory or your thought, when you represent your construal, you do not copy it, you achieve it. So we just achieved together something that otherwise would simply have failed to be achieved. The reading and the writing together potentiate one another. The reading is the attention, the writing is the representation, and together they give us access to that which would have stayed out of awareness. I think the one suggestion to Kiki's question about what does science have to do with art is that the creativity itself, the creativity is that which enables one to walk into the doubt. Rothko walks into the doubt. He lets himself do that. He perished by virtue of it. But he let himself walk into the doubt, into that purple mist, as did Bach, as did Shakespeare, as does James, as does any creative artist or scientist. We don't have to distinguish between art and science anymore. I think that's outdated. I distinguish between those who try to banish doubt and those who try to tolerate it. Scientist or artist were able to discover, create, find things that before we did it were not findable by virtue of the creative act, which I'm convinced is a matter of living in, wandering into doubt, and then coming back from that, not with the resolution of the doubt, but simply with the record of it. So I think we'll talk as the three of us now. We have a little time.
People may have questions specifically for you, and then the three of you can finish up.
My final line is that the care of the sick is a work of art.
So, questions for Rita Charon?
Hi, thank you so much. It's more of an observation. I was just really struck also by your ethic of care as a practitioner in relation to these stories that are more, it's more like orality in terms of what everyone shares, and you being the sort of, I think at one point you said witness, and just how that sort of alludes to these versions of storytelling and otherness in relationship to the kind of demographic that you service, given that they're Dominicans and the Rothko. So that's much for me just to sort of think about. Every day I take the bus into the Duke. I cut across through the Duke Hospital to get to my office, and I noticed there are poems by Langston Hughes and Carlos Williams, and then I'm thinking, what are we to do here other than I stop and read them every day, because one of them is going into an English class by Langston Hughes. And so, but that just sort of made me think through, and as a related aside, and I'm sort of stream of consciousness here, because you had me thinking about all these larger sort of constellation points. My mom lives here in North Carolina, and I often go to the doctor with her. I translate. And she built a 5-year relationship with her doctor. And then I just learned last week that there's a new thing called concierge medicine. So after 5 years of sharing these stories, and because I translate, sometimes I worried, my God, you sound so like folkloric. The doctor is going to think that we're something out of like Macondo or Garcia Marquez novel. Like, stop it. Can you just answer the questions? But after that, I just realized that what happens to these stories. And I just wanted to say that you were so inspiring and gave so much there because someone's actually listening. So thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to have a response? Or?
You know, I found myself worrying that once it became a concierge practice, your mother wouldn't be able to come up with the down payment for the concierge and would have to start over. That's where my mind went. But what happens is, we don't have to write the whole thing anymore. I will write in the electronic medical record up to a point, and then I write in the chart, the following paragraph is written by Ms. W. And I turn the keyboard around and I say, now you finish it. And that's when the patient is able to do what we just did, which is to use expression as discovery. And when I do this and the patient reads what he or she has written, it's like, I didn't know I was going to write that. One woman says, well, I don't know if I did it right. She says, I started with she, but I ended with I. See? So I think there are many, many futures for these accounts.
One of the interesting aspects of the Rothkos, whether they were at the Tate, which I think is the Seagram, or at the Rothko Chapel, or the new wing of the National Gallery, as opposed to MoMA, is that he wanted multiple photographs, paintings, so that to me, that's either a sentence or a paragraph. It's part of what goes around. And it is so disheartening when you just see a Rothko. So it's interesting that he did tell a very complicated story. Well, Seagrams eventually decided they didn't want it because I think it was going to be broken up. He went furious and said, I'm going to give it to the Tate. I mean,
They were destined for the Four Seasons, that big,
Yeah.
fancy, upscale restaurant in New York City. And he decided that he couldn't handle having his canvases hanging over the bar. So he took them away.
First of all, thank you for what you've given us today. Secondly, I just wonder, why can't we distinguish between science and art? Why is that outdated? I'd love to hear you talk more about that.
Well, I think the distinction makes invisible the fact that they do the same thing. I mean, so to come to see that the earth is round, or the heart is a pump, or that time and space are related, is the same thing that what Rothko or Henry James is doing out in that mist. It's wandering, hands outstretched, not knowing where you are or where you're headed for, and being open to this state of wandering through what amounts almost to unbearable freedom, and to return and to give an account of where you've been. I believe that that experience is the root of discovery. And whether it results in King Lear or relativity seems to me secondary.
Thanks. I have a question about ambiguity, because what makes me nervous about ambiguity is failure. The going into the ambiguous space and the having to do things wrong before things start to work. So this is I've been very vague so far. But you've described some practices that you do, like for instance, assigning this poem and then having people do free writing, or turning around your screen and giving the keyboard to the patient. And I'm wondering how you came to those practices, and were there things that you tried that didn't work? As well as did you try another poem and the free writes that came out of that didn't bring the same richness of discussion than other ones? Did you give patients too much control over their own narrative process so that you couldn't discern? You know, I want to know about how you came to grapple.
But I'm not sure that we shouldn't continue this together. I'm afraid of, but there are answers to this. Yeah. You know, I mean, but it's not a systematic hypothesis testing. Oh, no. It is fully hypothesis generating right from the beginning, so that the ambiguity doesn't have to be a closure, because there is no right, uncontested answer. So that allows the kind of unbearable freedom I'm talking about. But I mean, I can tell you about some of the other practices too. But I think we've had enough of this, and we should go on to the next.